Hi guys, because I occasionally get questions like this, I thought I'd make a quick video on basics. What I will try to do is explain the texts which form the basis for Islam as best I can. Most people will have heard of and maybe even read the Quran, the central religious book in Islam, and in my experience, not all Muslims have read the book completely because it is highly repetitive, not easy to absorb and quite dark. The language is ancient Arabic, which is no longer used today and only spoken by some scholars. Very few Muslims have read the Quran cover to cover and rely on their favorite verses plus the first chapter, which has ritualistic purposes. The majority of Muslims today don't actually speak Arabic, and around 800 million, that's like 60%, can't read or write at all. And just as an aside, the combined annual GDP of 57 Muslim countries, or 1.5 or 1.6 billion people, remains under $2 trillion. The USA, just by herself, produces goods and services worth $10.4 trillion. And Japan has 5,000 scientists per million population. All Muslim countries combined, 230. The Quran, meaning recite, unlike the two Bibles, consists of one single book, is divided into 114 chapters or surahs, follows no structure, has no concept or order other than the semblance of sorting by length, where chapter 1 consists of 7 sentences, chapter 2 consists of approximately 286, and the last, 114, only 6 sentences or verses or ayat. This results in approximately 6,500 sentences with just under 80,000 words. Approximately, because the ancient Arabs had no vowels, diacritical markings, punctuation marks or paragraphs at their disposal, so we don't really know where sentences or paragraphs start or end. This was added much later by humans, as are the various divisions into parts or groups. Just as a comparison, the New Testament consists of 134,000 words in Greek and 8,000 verses. A big difference is the vocabulary used, where we have around 8,000 words as opposed to 625 root words or 2,000 words of the Quran. But this is the end of the statistics section. Let me give you a quick demo of what the text originally looked like. So we take today's text, we strip the sorting information, then we go to the next level where we get rid of any formatting, and lastly we remove all the vowels. Now compare that to what we are used to today. Pure luxury. So another example shows the vital importance of commas and other punctuation. Woman without her man is lost. Woman without her man is lost. So we see that a small mistake by a scribe can result in huge differences. So let's analyze how the Quran was revealed to mankind according to Muslim tradition. The sentences today are individually transmitted to Muslims via a book, the Quran, which was compiled by humans over 1,000 years ago, having been written by scribes who were given the sentences orally, which allegedly all came from Muhammad, who is said to have received them from an angel, who in turn got them from the God of the Muslims, who read them off the tablets he had written trillions of years ago. Tablets made of gold, of course. So this is the whole series. Because the Quran is very vague, for example, sperm is produced somewhere in the upper body instead of the precise location, testicles, and has defects in correctly describing our world and basic things, such as mathematical calculations of inheritance. People, i.e. male humans, try to intervene and deliver different types of secondary texts to make things a bit clearer. Because different people came to different conclusions, we have the same situation in Islam as what we see in Christianity, where today we have tens of thousands of variations and groups, which is why a Taliban terrorist and the Emir of Qatar read and worship the same identical book canonized in Cairo in 1918, but derive very different worldviews from it. The Quran text is accompanied by several explanatory texts, the tafsirs. They were mostly written between the 9th and the 15th century by people such as Al-Tabari, Al-Jalalain, Ibn Abbas, Ibn Kathir, Al-Tustari, Al-Nazul, Al-Wahidi, Mufti Taqi Utmani, Maududi, etc. Now, these tafsirs follow the text of the Quran word for word, and they explain the particular usage of a word, as Arabic is not exactly a precise language, and a single word can have very different meanings, sometimes even 10 or 15. Now the next layer is where we get the Sunnah of Islam, everything in connection with Muhammad, the Sunnah being his entire life, and then the Hadiths, the narration. Actually, it should be Ahadith, but I've become so used to the English adaptation. Well, first are the Qudsi Hadiths, which are supposed to be authentic commands from Allah himself, who, well, somehow they did not make it into the Quran, but were transmitted via dreams or visions. There are 40 of these. Now, here Allah says, for example, that He is more merciful than angry, or that He is now responsible for rain and no longer the stars. Whatever blows your hair back. Now, the next and the most fascinating layer is actually the Hadiths proper. And this is where beliefs of different groups of Muslims already part company. Some say, no really, some say the Hadiths are forbidden in the Quran. Their line of argumentation is that the Quran is the direct word of their God, as though one day a complete Quran fell from heaven, and that hadiths are man-made and the hadith itself prohibits it, where Sahih Muslim says, "Do not write down anything from me except the Quran." Others quote Muhammad as having said, "I leave behind me two things, the Quran and my example, the Sunnah, and if you follow these, you will never go astray." You see, as usual in Islamic texts, you take your pick. So whatever you choose, the hadiths are all the sayings, actions, or decisions attributed to Muhammad. They were gathered and written down by hundreds of people, which amounted to more than 500,000 or even 1,000,000 at some stage. Because the sheer volume became unmanageable, someone went and threw everything but a handful out, saying they were not authentic. Because there were so many collectors, some were deemed authentic, others weak. This depends on what people thought was an unbroken chain of transmission from the mouth of Muhammad all the way up until one of the collectors wrote it down. This is why we have 6 of these authentic or Sahih Hadith authors. So you have Bukhari, Muslim, Suqrat, Dawud, Tirmidhi. The 6th one is not conclusive because people are not 100% sure of which is authentic and which not. Now, the first 2 are the most important and respected hadiths. The important thing here is that, as with the Bible and Jesus, none of these were eyewitnesses, but people who lived some 2 centuries after Muhammad allegedly existed. They are people who collected what someone heard someone say about someone else. Yet Muslims consider them authentic and only reflecting what really happened and what was said, sometimes word for word. It's as though someone today were to attempt to recapture every word Napoleon ever uttered. Hadiths can have different levels or a different status, but to explain all the intricacies and all the differences would go too far here. The hadiths can be used to verify almost anything. If anyone goes and adds the weaker ones, we have well over 20,000 sayings, excluding the repetitions, or more than 3 times the number of sentences in the Quran. Hadiths contain a mixed bag of comments, proverbs, fables, philosophy, and stories about Muhammad and his companions. They can teach you hygiene, praying, and what makes a prayer invalid, or the nonsensical stuff like not yawning or farting, that Satan lives in your nose, a woman's period is a kick from him, he puts knots in your head, flies while farting, or pees in your ear. There are even some hadiths covering Muhammad's fear of eclipses and bells, as well as 70 rules and regulations on how to urinate and defecate, or whether one should drink a glass of water standing or sitting, and explain the practice of coitus interruptus with female captives. They show Muhammad as a racist, as he calls blacks raisin heads or pug-nosed slaves. Some of the slaves of Allah go so far as to copy everything and grow beards, stop listening to music, ban pictures with persons on them, and generally follow many of the superstitions of the 7th century of Muhammad in today's world. A more serious example of the importance of hadiths is that without reading a hadith, one cannot understand Surah 111. There is no way to find out who Abu Lahab is by reading the Quran. Only in a hadith do we find out that he was the man in the Quraysh in Mecca who dared to insult Muhammad, resulting in the somewhat unkind verses in the Quran. The same goes for men like Luqman or Korah, who get no explanation in the book. On the other hand, something not in the Quran but only in the collected stories on the life of Muhammad give us the chronology of the killing of an old Jew, Abu Afaq, who dared doubt Muhammad and asked others to do the same. And this also goes for the murders of Asma bint Marwan, Al-Nadr, Abu Utsa, and many others. Only through the relevant hadiths do Muslims know how many times they need to pray. And this is for each and every day, because the number of prayers of 5 is not specified in the Quran. Only the hadiths 200 years later specify the number 5. What is strange is that some hadiths cover surahs of the Quran no longer found in the book. Bukhari declares that Muhammad was sent to earth with the instructions for the stoning of adulterers to be contained in the Quran. Yet this ayah, or maybe the entire surah, does not exist today as it was deleted. And then lastly, we have the biographies, the Sirat of Muhammad. The most famous one is Sirat Rasulallah, originally written by Ibn Ishaq. But these texts were lost and were rewritten by Ibn Hisham in the 9th century, who openly admitted, "I am omitting things which Ishaq recorded in this book. I have omitted things which are disgraceful to discuss and matters which would distress certain people." The anecdotes in the biographies are colossal. Muhammad's mother, Amina bint Wahab, said, "When he was born, there was a light that issued out of my pudendum and lit the palaces of Syria." I somehow could not verify this allegedly confirmed story in any historical account. I was further unable to verify the story that water out of a well rose up on its own towards the mother, honoring the fetus. They show the figure as both a cruel warlord, a greedy pirate, and a generous father. And then this concludes the traditional texts in Islam. What happens now is that the hadiths are searched regarding a specific problem, and then depending on whether it is mentioned in the Quran or not, the situation is interpreted and a decree is issued. This is known as a fatwa and regulates an issue for all Muslims who have to decide whether they want to adhere to it or not. These fatwas follow one of the mostly regional groups of Muslims because the groups determine what goes into the jurisprudence and how something is interpreted and dealt with, usually based on local culture. This is why you can have one Muslim saying apostasy requires stoning, the other beheading, and the next one says a lashing is sufficient. All three are right. I will not go into the next area, the scholarly commentaries, as this will take a book on its own to mention and explain all the different levels of clergy in Islam and all their different interpretations. Because at the end of the day, this is what Islam is actually based on, interpretations. We see that the ambiguity and erroneous descriptions in the Quran is continued in ambiguous and erroneous hadiths, which leaves humans having to sort things out. Examples of these you can find in my series on textual criticism, where I show the various textual shortfalls in the Quran and point out factual errors. I hope I've given an understandable overview without too much detail and, even more important, no contents, because believe you me, you can spend any amount of time digging for nuggets and then explaining them. If I've left something out, let me know and I'll see if I can fix it in an addendum. Thank you for your time.